I was studying for 8th grade exams when my friend Claude texted, "We're breaking into the school tonight. Bring a crowbar." I replied with LMAO, because Claude was a rule follower, the type to remind the teacher to check the homework just so he could collect another A+. But within seconds, he had already responded with, "Everything depends on this." My stomach dropped. Claude didn't joke about stuff like this. He wouldn't even share homework answers, let alone plan a break-in. I called him immediately, but he wouldn't pick up. Just texted back, "Can't talk. Meet me behind the gym at midnight, please." That please got me. Claude had tutored me through algebra last year when I was failing. Spent his lunch periods making sure I understood quadratic equations when everyone else had given up on me. I owed him everything. The next 2 hours crawled by. I tried focusing on my history notes, but kept reading the same paragraph about the Civil War over and over. My parents went to bed at 11. I waited another 20 minutes to make sure they were asleep, then slipped out my window in old jeans and a black hoodie. The crowbar from Dad's garage felt wrong in my backpack, heavy like guilt. I biked through empty suburban streets, avoiding the main roads where cops might be patrolling. The whole time I kept thinking about Claude's text. What could possibly make him risk his perfect record? His whole future? Dot High looked different at night, like those abandoned buildings in horror movies where terrible things happen. I found Claude behind the gym, dressed all black, pacing back and forth. His hands were shaking. "Thank goodness you came," he whispered, and his voice cracked a little. "They're demolishing the old computer lab at 6 tomorrow morning." "So?" I asked, confused. The computer lab had been closed for years. "I can't explain yet. Just trust me, okay?" His eyes were wild, desperate in a way I'd never seen. This wasn't the Claude who calmly explained polynomials. This was someone barely holding it together. He led me to a window on the side of the building, one he'd apparently loosened during school earlier. "I came back after detention and prepped it," he explained. Whatever this was about, it was eating him alive. I pried the window open with the crowbar, the sound making us both freeze. We crawled through into the old computer lab, dust sheets covering ancient monitors like ghosts. Claude went straight to a specific computer in the corner, dropping to his knees and searching frantically behind it. "It's not here!" His voice pitched higher, panicked. "It has to be here!" He scrambled to the storage room connected to the lab, tearing through boxes of old keyboards and tangled cables. I'd never seen him like this, throwing things, not caring about the noise. "Claude, what are we looking for?" I demanded, but he just kept searching, muttering 39 minutes. We had 39 minutes of camera footage. Footsteps echoed from upstairs. We both dove under desks, holding our breath as the security guard's steps passed overhead and continued down the hall. As soon as they faded, Claude went back to searching, even more frantic now. That's when I saw tears on his face. Claude, who didn't even cry when he broke his arm in PE, was crying. "Please," he whispered to himself. "Please be here." He spotted something behind an old printer and yanked out a dusty camcorder bag. Inside was an old camera with a mini DV tape, and Claude clutched it to his chest like he'd found buried treasure. "Is that what we came for?" I asked, completely lost. He finally looked at me, really looked at me, and the words tumbled out. 3 months ago, my big brother and I were messing around after school. We found this old camcorder and started filming stupid comedy sketches. Him doing impressions, me attempting parkour, both of us just being idiots. His voice broke. Sam died 2 weeks later. That car accident on Route 93. I remembered. Claude had been absent for a week. When he came back, teachers spoke to him in soft voices, and nobody asked him questions in class. "This is the only video I have of him just being himself," Claude continued. "Not graduation or holiday photos where everyone's posing. Just Sam being Sam. I forgot it was here until I saw the demolition notice yesterday. I tried asking the principal, the janitor, everyone. They all said no entering construction zones. That's when we heard it. 'Stop right there!' A fat man bellowed from around the corner. It was the security guard. Through the windows, police cars were already pulling in. What Claude did next made me realize that the straight-edged student thing was all an act. Brian Richardson moved toward us fast, his radio already at his mouth calling for backup, and Claude grabbed my arm, whispering, "Run." But I could see the police lights already pulling into the parking lot through the dusty windows. We were trapped between the security guard blocking the computer lab exit and the cops coming through the main entrance, and Claude still clutched that camcorder to his chest like dropping it would kill him. I made a split-second decision and stepped in front of Claude, putting myself between him and the security guard, because Claude had been through enough losing Sam without getting tackled by a 250-pound former cop who probably played football in high school. Brian Richardson stopped about 10 feet away, breathing hard from running, his hand going to his belt where pepper spray hung in a black holster. He was yelling at us to put our hands up and not move, his face red and sweaty under the buzzing fluorescent lights. Claude was shaking so badly behind me I could hear his teeth chattering, and I realized he wasn't the smart rule breaker the security guard thought he had caught. This was just a kid who missed his dead brother, so much he was willing to risk everything for 39 minutes of video. I raised my hand slowly and said we weren't armed. We were just students. Please don't hurt us. trying to sound calm even though my heart was beating, so hard I could feel it in my throat. My voice came out higher than normal, kind of squeaky and scared. Officer Seth Barlow came through the door with his partner right behind him, both with hands on their weapons, and Brian Richardson quickly explained he caught us breaking in through the window on the east side. The officers separated us immediately, one taking Claude to the far corner while Seth Barlow kept me near the door with his hand still resting on his gun. I watched Claude's face fall apart as they took the camcorder from his hands to bag as evidence, his mouth opening in this silent cry that made my chest hurt. Seth Barlow asked for my name, age, and parents' phone number in this tired voice like he had done this 1,000 times with stupid kids doing stupid things they thought were smart. I gave him the information while watching Claude across the room, trying to explain something to the other officer, his words coming out too fast and mixed up to understand. The other officer just kept shaking his head and writing things down on a small notepad. They made us sit on the floor with our backs against opposite walls while they searched the computer lab for more people or weapons or whatever else they thought might be hiding. Claude wouldn't look at me, just stared at the clear evidence bag containing the camcorder, and I could see tears running down his face that he wasn't even trying to hide anymore. His whole body was shaking like he was freezing even though it was warm in the lab. Seth Barlow found my backpack with the crowbar inside, and his expression changed from routine boredom to serious worry as he held it up and asked if I used this to break in. I admitted yes because lying seemed pointless now, and he looked at his partner in a way that told me we had crossed from simple sneaking around into something way more serious with the breaking and entering tools. His partner nodded and said something into his radio about possible burglary charges. Brian Richardson explained he was doing his regular rounds when he heard noises from the closed-off wing and came to check, finding the loosened window that someone had messed with earlier. The officers took photos of everything with their phones and a fancy camera, the window, the crowbar, the disturbed dust sheets covering the old computers, the camcorder and its evidence bag, even our shoes so they could match them to footprints in the dust. The camera flashes kept going off, making white spots in my vision. Seth Barlow's partner called for a juvenile transport unit on his radio, while Seth started the formal arrest thing, reading us our rights in this flat voice that made everything feel weird and scary at the same time. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. You have the right to an attorney. Claude finally looked at me then, his eyes all red and puffy from crying, and mouthed, "I'm sorry," across the room. I tried to mouth back that it was okay, but I don't think he saw because the officer near him told him to face forward. They put these plastic zip tie things on our wrists instead of metal handcuffs, which somehow made it feel both less scary and more scary at the same time. The plastic dug into my skin, and I couldn't move my hands apart at all. The officers led us out separately through different doors, Seth taking me toward the main entrance while his partner took Claude the other way. I caught one last look at Claude being walked toward a police car in the parking lot, his shoulders shaking up and down with crying he was trying to keep quiet. The night air hit my face and I realized I was sweating even though I felt cold inside. Seth Barlow opened the back door of his police car and guided me inside with one hand on my head so I wouldn't hit it on the door frame. The seats were hard plastic that smelled like cleaning chemicals and old coffee. He got in the front seat and adjusted his rearview mirror to look at me. His partner was putting Claude in a different car across the parking lot. Seth started the engine and pulled out of the school lot slowly, taking the back roads instead of the main streets. He cleared his throat and said my parents were being called right now and would meet us at the station, his voice softer than it had been at the school. He asked if I understood why what we did was serious. I nodded and said yes because I did understand. Even though sitting there with my wrists still zip-tied behind my back, I knew I would probably do it again for Claude if I had to. Seth looked at me in the mirror for a long moment before turning his eyes back to the road. The station was only 10 minutes away, but it felt like an hour with nothing to do but watch streetlights pass by and think about how much trouble I was in. We pulled into the back entrance of the police station, where there were no windows for people to see us being brought in. Seth helped me out of the car and cut the zip ties off my wrists with a small knife from his belt. My hands tingled as blood rushed back into them. He led me through a gray hallway with fluorescent lights that made everything look washed out and depressing. Other officers looked up from their desks as we passed but didn't say anything. Seth took me to a small room with plastic chairs and a metal table bolted to the floor. The fluorescent lights buzzed in this annoying way that made my head hurt, and everything felt harsh and too bright. A different officer came in with a paper cup of water and set it down in front of me. He said my mom was on her way and should be here soon, then left me alone in the room. The door stayed open, but I could see officers walking back and forth in the hallway outside. I drank the water even though I wasn't really thirsty, just to have something to do with my hands. The reality of what we had done started sinking in while I sat there. I had never been in trouble with police before. Never even gotten detention at the school. Now I was sitting in a police station at 2 a.m, waiting for my mom to come get me after breaking into school with a crowbar. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, and I watched the minutes crawl by. 15 minutes, 20, 30. I started thinking about Claude in another room somewhere in this building, probably just as scared as I was. 40 minutes after I got to the station, I heard my mom's voice in the hallway asking where I was. She sounded terrified and confused at the same time. An officer directed her to my room, and she came through the door looking like she had just rolled out of bed and thrown on clothes. Her hair was messy and sticking up on one side, and she was wearing sweatpants with one of my dad's old t-shirts. She rushed over and hugged me hard, checking my face and arms to see if I was hurt. Then she stepped back and asked what was I thinking in this broken voice that made me feel worse than any yelling could have. I tried to explain, but the words got stuck in my throat. Seth Barlow came in then and asked if we could talk in his office. Mom kept her hand on my shoulder as we followed him down another hallway to a small office with papers stacked everywhere. Through the window, I could see into another office where Seth was bringing in Claude's dad, Jasper Floyd. Jasper looked devastated, his face all pale and drawn as the officers explained the situation to him. He kept shaking his head like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. I realized this was probably the first major trouble Claude had ever been in his whole life, which somehow made it worse because their family was already dealing with Sam's death. Seth sat down across from us and pulled out a notepad. He said they needed to interview me about what happened with my mom present since I was a minor. I explained everything, starting with Claude's text message earlier that night. I told him about meeting behind the gym at midnight, about breaking in through the window, about Claude searching frantically for the camcorder. I explained about Sam dying 2 weeks ago in the car accident, and how the video was the only casual footage Claude had of his brother just being himself. I told him about the demolition scheduled for 6 in the morning, and how Claude had tried asking the principal and janitor and everyone, but they all said no entering construction zones. Seth's expression softened a little bit as he took notes, but then he explained that understanding the motivation didn't change the criminal trespass and breaking and entering charges we were facing. The crowbar made it more serious because it showed we came prepared with tools. Mom's hand tightened on my shoulder when he said that. She asked if I knew what I was doing was illegal. I looked at her and admitted yes, I knew it was against the rules, but Claude needed help, and I owed him for all the times he helped me with algebra last year when I was failing. She closed her eyes like she was trying to process how her son, who never got in trouble, ended up arrested for breaking into school. Seth finished writing everything down and said we could go home, but there would be a court date coming, and we should expect to hear from the school about disciplinary action. He left the room to finish paperwork. Mom and I sat there in silence for a few minutes. Then Seth came back and said Claude and his dad were leaving too, and did we want to see them before we left? Mom looked at me and I nodded. They brought us to another waiting area where Claude and Jasper were gathering their things. Claude looked at me and whispered, "Thank you for coming so quietly, I almost didn't hear it." His eyes were still red and puffy from crying. Jasper Floyd looked at me with this expression I couldn't quite read. Not anger exactly, but maybe gratitude mixed with guilt that I got dragged into his son's crisis. He put his hand on Claude's shoulder and they walked out ahead of us. The drive home at 3 in the morning was the longest ride of my life. Mom didn't say anything for the first 10 minutes, just gripped the steering wheel tight and stared at the empty road. Finally, she asked me to explain again why this was worth getting arrested for. I tried to make her understand about Sam and how the video was going to be demolished in just 3 hours. I told her about Claude being the person who saved my grades last year, who spent his lunch periods making sure I understood quadratic equations when everyone else had given up on me. I explained how he texted me desperate, and I couldn't just ignore that. Mom listened without interrupting and then said she understood loyalty, but that I could have come to her first. She was right, and I knew it, but I also knew that adults would have said no or taken too long to figure out permissions and paperwork. Sometimes helping a friend means making choices that look wrong from the outside, but feel necessary from the inside. We pulled into our driveway and Mom told me to go straight to bed. I went to my room, but I couldn't sleep at all the rest of the night. I just lay there in bed thinking about Claude and whether they gave him back the camcorder or if it was still sitting in an evidence bag somewhere at the police station. My phone was confiscated as part of my punishment, so I couldn't even text to check if he was okay. I stared at the ceiling, listening to birds start chirping outside as the sky got lighter, knowing that in a few hours the demolition crew would arrive at the school and turn that old computer lab into rubble. At 6 in the morning, I heard the rumble of heavy machinery starting up somewhere in the distance. The demolition crew had arrived at the school. I rolled over in bed and stared at my ceiling, thinking about that dusty camcorder and how if we hadn't broken in last night, the video of Sam would be crushed under concrete and metal right now. The thought didn't make getting arrested feel better exactly, but it made the whole thing seem less pointless. I pulled my blanket over my head and tried to fall asleep, but my brain wouldn't shut off. 2 hours later, Mom knocked on my door and came in without waiting for an answer. She sat on the edge of my bed and told me Principal Evans had called and wanted to see us at the school at 10 o'clock this morning. My stomach twisted into a tight knot because I knew what this meant. Suspension for sure, maybe even getting kicked out completely. My record had been clean up until last night, and now there would be this huge black mark following me around forever. Mom asked if I wanted breakfast, but I shook my head because the idea of eating made me feel sick. She left me alone to get dressed, and I put on jeans and a plain shirt, nothing that would make me stand out or look like I was trying too hard. The drive to the school was quiet except for the radio playing some talk show that neither of us was really listening to. Mom kept her eyes on the road, and I watched houses and trees go past my window. We pulled into the parking lot at 9:50, and I saw Claude and his dad getting out of their car near the main entrance. Claude looked terrible, like he hadn't slept at all, with dark circles under his eyes and his hair sticking up in weird directions. Jasper Floyd nodded at Mom in this grim way that said they were both dealing with the same awful situation of their kids screwing up badly. We all walked into the building together without talking much. The main office waiting area had those uncomfortable plastic chairs that squeak when you move. Claude sat across from me and we made eye contact for a second before he looked down at his hands. His fingers were shaking a little bit, and I wondered if mine looked the same way. The secretary told us Principal Evans would be ready in a few minutes and we should wait there. Those few minutes felt like hours. I counted the tiles on the floor and tried not to think about what was about to happen. Finally, the office door opened, and Principal Evans stood there looking at all four of us. She asked us to come in together, which surprised me because I thought she'd talk to us separately. Her office was neat with diplomas on the wall and a big wooden desk in the middle. On that desk sat a clear plastic evidence bag with the camcorder inside. Principal Evans sat down behind her desk and folded her hands together. She explained that Officer Barlow had called her this morning and told her everything about last night, including the part about Sam dying and the demolition happening today. Her face was serious but not angry, more sad than mad. She looked directly at Claude and asked him why he didn't come to her first about getting the camcorder back before it was demolished. Claude's voice came out rough and quiet when he answered. He said he tried asking other people like the janitor and the assistant principal, but everyone told him no because of safety rules and construction zones being off limits. Principal Evans let out a long breath through her nose and said she wished he had come straight to her office because she would have made an exception for something this important. She would have gone into that computer lab herself and gotten the camcorder for him. The principal shifted in her chair, and her expression got more formal. She explained that even though she understood why we did what we did, breaking into school property was a serious thing that needed consequences. She was recommending a 3-day suspension for both of us, plus mandatory community service hours and a formal incident report that would go in our permanent records. Jasper Floyd spoke up then, and his voice sounded thick like he might cry. He explained that Claude had been struggling so much since Sam died, and this wasn't about being a bad kid or not caring about rules. This was about grief making people desperate. He said he took full responsibility for not seeing how badly his son needed help, holding on to memories of his brother. Mom added that I had made a really poor choice, but it came from wanting to help a friend, and she'd already grounded me at home with no phone or computer for weeks. Principal Evans listened to both parents without interrupting them. Then she looked at Claude and me and asked if we understood why rules existed, even when they felt unfair or got in the way of things that mattered. We both nodded. I heard myself saying that I understood there would be consequences, but if Claude needed me again, I would still help him, because that's what friends do. I knew it probably wasn't what Principal Evans wanted to hear, but it was the truth. She almost smiled at that, just a tiny bit at the corner of her mouth. She said loyalty was a good quality, but it needed to be balanced with better judgment and thinking through options before jumping straight to breaking laws. Principal Evans was quiet for a minute, like she was deciding something important. Then she said she was changing her recommendation to a 2-day suspension instead of 3 days and 50 hours of community service for each of us that had to be finished before the end of the semester. We also had to write letters apologizing to Brian Richardson for scaring him during his night shift. The permanent record would have a note about what happened, but it would also include the circumstances about Sam's death and the demolition, which might help if colleges or other schools asked about it later. Principal Evans reached across her desk and picked up the evidence bag containing the camcorder. She opened it slowly and pulled out the dusty camera, turning it over in her hands like she was checking it for damage. Then she held it out to Claude across the desk, explaining that Officer Barlow had released it this morning since it was not actually evidence of any crime, just the reason someone committed one. Claude's hands shook as he took the camcorder from her, and he clutched it against his chest exactly the same way he had in the computer lab when he first found it behind that old printer. His fingers gripped it tight like someone might try to take it away again. Jasper Floyd made a sound, then that was halfway between a sob and a gasp, and tears started streaming down his face as he thanked Principal Evans over and over. His voice broke up while he spoke, and he had to stop twice to wipe his eyes with the back of his hand. Principal Evans watched him for a moment before speaking quietly, saying she lost her own brother many years ago, and she understood what physical memories meant when someone was gone. She said photos and formal videos were important, but they did not capture the real person the way casual moments did. The room felt heavy after that, like we were all sharing something sad together that went beyond the rules Claude and I had broken. Even Mom looked like she might cry, and she reached over to squeeze my hand under the table. We sat in silence for maybe 30 seconds before Principal Evans cleared her throat and said we were dismissed, handing us each a folder with our suspension paperwork and community service assignment sheets. The papers listed where we had to go, who to report to, and how many hours we needed to complete before the end of the semester. Claude and I stood up at the same time, both of us still holding our folders, and we walked toward the door with our parents following behind us. In the hallway outside the principal's office, Claude finally turned to me and spoke directly for the first time since we got caught. He said he was sorry he got me arrested, his voice quiet and guilty. I told him to shut up because that is what friends do, and I meant it completely. Jasper overheard me say it, and he stepped forward to grip my shoulder hard in thanks, not saying anything but squeezing tight enough that I knew he meant it. Mom and Jasper exchanged phone numbers before we left, agreeing to stay in touch about the community service schedule and making sure we both showed up where we were supposed to. The next 2 days of suspension felt strange and uncomfortable in ways I had not expected. Part of me was relieved to avoid school and all the gossip that was probably spreading about what Claude and I did, but another part felt anxious about falling behind in my classes. I kept thinking about the homework assignments piling up and the lessons I was missing while sitting at home. Mom brought home my homework assignments from the school each afternoon, delivered by teachers who sent them to the office. I worked through them at the kitchen table while grounded from everything except studying, no phone or computer or TV or anything fun. Just textbooks and worksheets and the sound of the clock ticking on the wall. My older brother Rowan came home from college that weekend, walking in Friday night with his laundry bag and a backpack full of dirty clothes. Mom told him what happened over dinner while I sat there pushing food around my plate and waiting for the lecture. But instead of yelling at me or telling me how disappointed he was, Rowan looked at me across the table and said it was stupid, but also kind of brave. Mom glared at him immediately and told him not to encourage bad decisions, but I felt slightly less like a complete failure after he said it. When I returned to the school on Wednesday morning, the story had already spread through the 8th grade, but not in the way I feared it would. People knew the basic facts about what happened, that Claude's brother died and we broke in to save a video, and we got caught by the security guard. Most of the reactions I got were sympathetic instead of mocking, with kids I barely knew coming up to say they were sorry about Claude's brother, or that they understood why we did it. A few people called us idiots, but even they said it in a way that seemed more impressed than mean. Claude and I started our community service together the following Saturday morning at the local food bank on the edge of town. The coordinator showed us where to sort donations, separating canned goods from boxed items, and checking expiration dates on everything. The work was boring and repetitive, standing at long tables and moving items from bins into different bins for hours. But being together made it easier, and we did not talk much about that night or what happened after. We just existed in the shared understanding of what we did and why we did it, sorting soup cans and pasta boxes in comfortable silence. During our 3rd Saturday shift at the food bank, Claude brought his laptop in his backpack and asked during our break if I wanted to see the video. We sat on the curb outside the building with the laptop balanced on his knees, and he pulled up the file from the camcorder. It started with Sam standing in the computer lab doing terrible celebrity impressions, his voice going high and squeaky for one person and deep and growly for another. Claude laughed behind the camera, telling Sam he sounded nothing like the real celebrities, and Sam just grinned and did another impression even worse than the first. They spent the whole video just being goofy brothers, trying parkour moves that failed badly and making up stupid comedy sketches that were not funny but made them laugh anyway. I understood completely watching it why this was worth everything we went through. The video was only 39 minutes long, but it captured Sam's personality in a way that graduation photos and holiday videos never could. Those formal recordings showed Sam posing and smiling politely, but this showed him being himself without trying to impress anyone. Claude told me he watched it every night before bed, sometimes crying through parts of it but mostly feeling less alone. He said it helped him remember Sam as a real person instead of just someone who died, keeping his brother alive in his memory through those 39 minutes of stupid jokes and failed stunts. At the school during the following week, our teachers were understanding about the suspension gap, and most offered to help us catch up without penalty. My algebra teacher pulled me aside after class one afternoon, the same teacher who knew Claude had tutored me through the subject last year when I was failing. She said real friendship was rare and valuable, even when it led to poor decisions, and she was glad I had someone like Claude in my life, and that he had someone like me in his. The next Monday at the school, Claude and I walked to the security office during lunch to deliver our apology letters to Brian Richardson. He was eating a sandwich at his desk when we knocked, and he looked up with this expression I couldn't quite read. Not angry, but not friendly either. We handed him the letters without saying much, just apologized again in person for scaring him that night and making his job harder. Brian opened Claude's letter first and read it slowly, his eyes moving across the page, and when he finished, he set it down carefully and looked at Claude for a long moment. He told us he had 2 kids our age, a son in 8th grade and a daughter in 7th, and he hoped they would have friends loyal enough to take risks for them if they ever needed it. But he also said we should have found another way, that breaking rules even for good reasons teaches the wrong lesson about how to solve problems. Claude nodded and said he understood, that he had been desperate and not thinking clearly, and Brian seemed to accept that. Before we left, Brian mentioned that he had lost his own brother years ago in a construction accident, which explained why he seemed so touched by Claude's explanation about Sam. Walking back to the cafeteria, Claude was quiet but looked lighter somehow, like delivering that apology had lifted something heavy off his shoulders. 2 days later, during fifth period history, the classroom door opened and Officer Seth Barlow walked in with Principal Evans. My stomach dropped, thinking we were in trouble again, but Seth just asked if Claude and I could step into the hallway for a minute. He kept it brief, explaining that he had advocated for minimal charges with the prosecutor because the context mattered, that grief makes people do things they normally wouldn't consider. He made us promise to come to adults first next time we faced an impossible situation, and we both agreed, even though I knew some things feel too urgent to wait for permission. Claude asked if the camcorder was really ours to keep, and Seth confirmed that it was never evidence of a crime, just the reason for one, which made it Claude's property. Before heading back to his patrol car, Seth told us he had a younger brother too, and understood why that video was worth the risk, but that we had gotten lucky with understanding adults and shouldn't count on that luck holding twice. Over the next few weeks, I noticed Claude's grades slipping in most of his classes, his usual straight A's dropping to B's and even a C+ in English. He was trying to focus, but grief kept pulling his attention away, making it hard to care about homework when his brother was gone. I started helping him with history notes the way he had helped me with algebra last year, meeting at the library after school to go over the Revolutionary War and the Constitution. There was something healing about being able to give back after he had given me so much, sitting at the same table where he had patiently explained quadratic equations while I struggled to understand. Claude would stare at the textbook pages for minutes without reading, then snap back and ask me to repeat what I had just said about the Boston Tea Party. I didn't get frustrated with him the way some people might have, just repeated things as many times as needed and waited while he processed information more slowly than before. At home, my relationship with Mom shifted in ways I didn't expect after that night we got arrested. She was still disappointed about the break-in and made that clear through continued grounding and extra chores, but she also seemed to respect that I had made a conscious choice based on my values, even if those values led to breaking rules. One evening while I was washing dishes, she told me I needed to develop better judgment about when loyalty requires action versus when it requires patience. But then she added that she was glad I was the kind of person who shows up for friends when they need help, that too many people talk about loyalty without ever proving it through sacrifice. She said the trick was learning to show up in ways that didn't involve criminal charges, and I agreed, even though I still wasn't sure what the right choice would have been that night. About a month after everything happened, Jasper Floyd called our house and invited me to dinner at their place on Friday evening. Mom drove me over, and walking into Claude's house felt different from I expected, with Sam's photos everywhere, but arranged in a way that felt less like a shrine and more like a home with memories. Sam smiled from frames on the mantle and the walls, pictures from football games and family vacations and his high school graduation, and Claude seemed more relaxed moving through those rooms than he had in the weeks immediately after his brother died. Jasper cooked spaghetti and meatballs, Sam's favorite meal apparently, and we ate at the kitchen table while Jasper asked about school and our community service at the food bank. The conversation felt almost normal until dessert, when Jasper set down his fork and looked at me directly. He thanked me again for helping Claude that night, his voice getting rough with emotion, and said Sam would have liked knowing his little brother had a friend willing to risk trouble for something important. The comment made Claude tear up, but in a good way, like his brother's memory was honored instead of mourned, and Jasper reached over to grip Claude's shoulder. They had this moment of silent understanding that I felt privileged to witness, a father and son connected through shared loss and love for someone who wasn't there anymore. Before I left that night, Jasper showed me more photos of Sam, stories about pranks he pulled, and jokes he told, and I understood why that 39-minute video mattered so much, because it captured the real Sam that these posed photos couldn't quite show. Our community service hours accumulated slowly through September and October, Claude and I showing up at the food bank every Saturday morning to sort donations and stock shelves. The work became routine in a comfortable way, moving canned goods from delivery trucks to storage rooms and checking expiration dates on hundreds of boxes. We developed an efficient system where I handled the heavy lifting and Claude managed the inventory lists, working side by side without needing to talk much. The coordinator, an older woman named Margaret who ran the food bank, started giving us more responsibility after the first month, letting us help with client intake and food distribution. She told us during our 8th week that we were welcome to keep volunteering even after our required hours were complete, that good volunteers were hard to find, and we had proven ourselves useful rather than just serving time. At the school, I watched Claude slowly start participating in class again, instead of just going through the motions. He raised his hand during English to answer a question about symbolism in To Kill a Mockingbird, and the teacher looked surprised but pleased to hear his voice. During lunch, I noticed him smiling occasionally at something someone said. Not the fake smile he wore right after Sam died, but something more genuine that reached his eyes. He still had bad days where grief pulled him under, where he would sit silently at our lunch table staring at nothing, but the good days were becoming more frequent. His grades started climbing back up too, the C+ in English becoming a B-, and then a solid B, and his other classes following the same upward trend. In early November, our school counselor called Claude and me into her office to discuss the permanent record notation from the break-in. I had been worried about this since Principal Evans mentioned it, imagining college applications getting rejected because of one night's bad decision. But the counselor explained that colleges care more about patterns of behavior than single incidents, especially ones with documented extenuating circumstances like grief and loyalty. She showed us how the notation was written, mentioning the trespassing but also including context about Sam's death and our clean records before and after the incident. "We weren't ruined," she said, "just marked as human and imperfect, which most admissions officers would understand and possibly even respect." The relief I felt hearing that was huge, like a weight I didn't know I was carrying had been lifted off my chest. 3 months after the break-in, Claude and I were sorting canned vegetables at the food bank when he mentioned he had been seeing the school counselor regularly to process Sam's death. He said it was actually helping, giving him tools to handle the grief when it felt overwhelming, and teaching him that talking about Sam kept his brother alive in memory, rather than locked away in pain. Claude told me the video gives him something concrete to hold on to when grief feels too big, that watching Sam laugh and joke around reminds him his brother was real and loved life. He said all the consequences we faced, the suspension and community service and permanent record notation, felt worthwhile because that video was irreplaceable and now it was safe. I agreed, thinking about how that one night had changed everything but also nothing. How we were still the same people just marked by experience and consequence, and the knowledge that some things matter more than perfect records. My afternoons changed after that. Claude and I started meeting at the library most days after school, spreading our homework across the same table where we used to just focus on math. Sometimes we worked in total silence, both of us scribbling notes or reading textbooks, and it felt comfortable instead of awkward. Other times, Claude would mention something about Sam, like how his brother used to make fun of his handwriting or always stole his good pens, and I would just listen while he talked. The friendship felt different now, built on something heavier than shared classes and lunch periods. We had faced cops and consequences together, and that created a bond that regular friendship stuff couldn't match. My birthday came in late November, and Claude showed up at my house with a small wrapped box. Inside was a flash drive with a single file labeled Sam and Claude, Computer Lab, August. He told me I was part of the story now and should have the memory too, since I had risked everything to help save it. I watched the video again that night, seeing Sam doing terrible movie star voices while Claude laughed so hard he could barely hold the camera steady. They were just being brothers, completely unaware that in 2 weeks Sam would be gone. The joy on both their faces felt pure and real, the kind of happiness that exists before tragedy teaches you to appreciate moments while they last. I understood completely why Claude had been willing to face arrest and suspension and permanent record marks to preserve this. Some things hold value that can't be measured in grades or college applications. Our community service hours finally ended in early December with a small ceremony at the food bank. Margaret, the coordinator who had been supervising us for months, thanked all the volunteers and specifically mentioned Claude and me as examples of young people who showed up consistently and worked hard. After the ceremony, Claude and I talked in the parking lot and decided to keep coming twice a month, even though our required hours were complete. The work felt meaningful in a way that community service punishment wasn't supposed to feel, and we had gotten to know the regular staff and clients who came through. Helping people who actually needed food seemed more important than spending Saturday mornings sleeping in or playing video games. A few days later, Principal Evans stopped us in the hallway between classes. She asked how we were doing, and her voice carried genuine interest instead of the administrative concern that adults usually use with students who caused problems. She told Claude she was glad he got his video back, and he thanked her for understanding why it mattered so much. The whole exchange lasted maybe 30 seconds, but it felt significant somehow, like proof that adults could see past rule-breaking to the reasons underneath. Winter came, and the demolition of the old computer lab finished completely, replaced by a bright new science wing that opened in January with big windows and modern equipment. Every time I walked past it, I thought about that dusty room filled with old monitors and tangled cables, the place where Claude found his brother's memory preserved in a forgotten camcorder. The new building looked nice, all clean and efficient, but I preferred the version that existed in my head, the one that held something irreplaceable until we rescued it. Around that same time, Jasper Floyd approached me privately after school one afternoon. He explained that he was starting a small scholarship fund in Sam's name for students who showed exceptional loyalty and friendship, and he wanted me to know that I had inspired the idea. Watching me help Claude that night, facing consequences alongside his son instead of abandoning him, had reminded Jasper that some kids still valued friendship over avoiding trouble. The first recipient would be announced at 8th grade graduation in June, and the scholarship would continue through high school and beyond. Something good was emerging from tragedy, a way to honor Sam by recognizing the kind of loyalty his brother had found when he needed it most. At the school, Claude and I developed a reputation as the kids who broke in for a video. Instead of becoming a scandal that followed us around negatively, it turned into this story about friendship and grief that people seemed to respect. Teachers sometimes referenced it when discussing ethics in social studies or talking about situational judgment in English class. We became an example of how context matters, how the same action can be viewed differently depending on the reasons behind it. The permanent record notation existed, but it came with an asterisk of understanding that made it feel less like a stain and more like a mark of character. My grades stayed solid through the rest of the year, hovering around B+ and A- in most subjects. Claude maintained his mostly A record despite everything that had happened, proving that one night of rule-breaking hadn't destroyed his academic future. We studied for finals together in May, quizzing each other on history dates and science terms, and I realized the break-in had just become part of our stories. It was a night when loyalty mattered more than rules, when friendship meant facing consequences together, when preserving memory justified breaking laws. Our futures weren't ruined, just marked by experience and the knowledge that perfect records matter less than doing right by the people you care about. On the anniversary of Sam's death in early June, Claude texted asking if I wanted to watch the video with him. I went to his house that evening and found him and Jasper in Claude's room, the laptop already set up. We sat together and watched Sam being goofy and alive, doing impressions and making his little brother laugh. The video still made me understand why Claude had been desperate enough to break into school, why those 39 minutes of footage were worth any consequence. It felt sad watching it, knowing Sam was gone, but also beautiful in a strange way. This preserved moment of joy existed because we had saved it from demolition, and now it could help their family remember Sam as he actually was, instead of just the sanitized version that existed in formal photos. After the video ended, Jasper spoke quietly about being grateful we broke the rules. He said some things are worth the consequences, and having that video had helped their whole family process grief in healthier ways. Sometimes the right choice and the legal choice aren't the same thing, he told us, and learning that at 14 wasn't a bad lesson to carry forward. The video gave them something concrete to hold on to when grief felt too big, proof that Sam had been real and happy and loved his little brother. Rules mattered, Jasper said, but so did knowing when something mattered more. The weeks between Sam's anniversary and the end of 8th grade passed with this weird mix of normal school stuff and knowing Claude and I had this shared experience that set us apart. We started planning our high school schedules together during lunch in May, sitting in the cafeteria with course catalogs spread between our trays. Claude wanted to take honors English and advanced algebra, while I was aiming for regular English and geometry, but we both signed up for the same history and science classes, so we'd have at least 2 periods together every day. The suspension felt like ancient history by then, just this thing that happened that we didn't talk about much, but that definitely changed how we saw rules and consequences. Our teachers had moved on from treating us like we needed special handling, and other kids stopped asking about the break-in, so it became part of our story instead of the whole story. My grades stayed solid through finals, mostly B's with an A in history, and Claude maintained his usual mix of A's and A-, despite everything that had knocked him sideways earlier in the year. We studied together for exams the same way we'd been doing all year, quizzing each other on dates and formulas and vocabulary words, and I realized the friendship felt different now, built on something stronger than just him helping me pass algebra. The permanent record notation existed somewhere in our files, but it came with enough context that our counselor said colleges would understand we weren't actual delinquents, just kids who made a choice based on grief and loyalty. Our final community service Saturday at the food bank arrived in early June, right before 8th grade graduation. The coordinator gathered all the volunteers that morning and thanked everyone for their hours. And when she got to Claude and me, she pulled us aside after to say we'd been 2 of the most reliable helpers, despite starting as court-ordered service. She hugged us both, this genuine hug that felt like she actually cared, and told us we were welcome back anytime we wanted to volunteer. Claude looked at me and I nodded, and we told her we'd come back twice a month through high school because the work felt good, and we'd gotten attached to the regular staff and clients. She seemed surprised that we wanted to keep coming after our required hours were done, but she wrote down our names in her volunteer schedule book for the rest of summer and into fall. Walking home that afternoon with the June sun beating down on the sidewalk, Claude was quiet for a few blocks before he said, "Thank you for that night one more time," his voice soft and serious. I told him he would have done the same thing for me if our situations were reversed, and we both knew that was true without needing to discuss it further. We broke rules and faced real consequences, got arrested and suspended and earned permanent record notations that would follow us for years. But we also learned that some things matter more than perfect records, that friendship and loyalty and preserving the people we love are worth risking trouble for, and that's a lesson I figured was worth keeping forever.